let that be our prayer always. Saints of Dallas UMC, greetings. It is good to be with you today. It is an honor and privilege to be here. And I stand among you to proclaim that the good news of the scriptures for today is that God and God alone is the source of our salvation, our wholeness, our completeness, our fully being the person God created us to be. We don't earn God's love. We are created by it and with it. But before we reflect on being right-sized with God, let us pray. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our hope. Amen. Well, I apologize for starting off the sermon by probably offending you. But as I continue my journey with Christ and the people of Christ, studying scriptures and living as faithfully as I can, it's been my experience occasionally, not often, but just, it does happen. Sometimes Jesus is a jerk. Inappropriate laughter. Okay. Throughout his ministry, he was known, and he just attracted thousands of people because he was an amazing storyteller. He could run these stories that would hook you and bring you in and just be amazing. We call them parables, and they were, above all, a powerful teaching tool for Jesus. They always start off sounding good. And it's usually pretty easy, within the first sentence or two, to figure out who's the good person, who's the bad person in the parable, in the storyline, okay? Pretty easy. And so, early on, we have it all figured out, and we're, fortunately, on the side of the good person. That's just the way it looks. And we go along through the parable, understanding that, believing that, thinking good about that. And then Jesus comes to his final sentence or two. And in that last sentence or two, Jesus just jerks the rug right underneath our feet. And we end up at the end of the parable, at least with some confusion, or disappointment, or discomfort, or anger, or panic, because that comfortable rug has been jerked from underneath us. And that's certainly what happens this morning. We need as best we can. I know we've heard this parable many times and we sort of have it all figured out, but we need as best we can to try and approach it as the first people who heard it probably experienced it. And not the first people that read Luke's gospel with that warning, but that says Jesus told a story to some people who thought they were better than others and who looked down on everyone else. Luke gives us a tip-off. This is going to be a challenging thing. But, we might have missed the introduction, and in Jesus' day, there was no introduction like that. He just started off. There were these two guys in the temple, praying. Pharisee, tax collector. We need to understand right there, we've got it all figured out. The Pharisees, we have a bias against the Pharisees. Because scribes and Pharisees, all the way through the Gospels, Jesus is challenging them, arguing with them. But Pharisees were the top dogs religiously in Israel in Jesus' time and before and after. They were men who had dedicated themselves, and I'm sorry, they were all men. They were men who had dedicated themselves to living as righteous as they could according to the Torah as understood at that time. Yes, they tithed, of course. Most did more than that. They fasted twice a week or more. They studied the scriptures. They worshiped with people. They went to synagogue. I mean, they were model people of faith for the people of Israel. Everybody else was a little jealous of, I wish I could be a Pharisee, but I just don't have the time. You know? And tax collectors. Oh, that's even easy for us to figure out today. Did many of us get our property tax statement in the mail recently? Oh, joy! Tax collectors. Yeah. Enough said. So right off the bat, we know who's good and who's bad. But then Jesus comes down to those last two sentences. When the two men went home, it was the tax collector and not the Pharisee who was pleasing to God. I'm sorry. Okay, try and envision the group that first heard this story, not us, 2,000 plus years ago, the group that first heard this story, knowing that the Pharisee was great, the tax collector was a crumb, and then they heard that final sentence. Well, there would have been, did I hear that right? You know, and in the back, you know, Thomas nudging Martha and saying, my hearing's not as good as it used to be. What did he do? That the tax collector is with, what? It's unconceivable. Not even possible. Jesus made a mistake. I'm sure he wasn't listening to what came out of his mouth. Well, like I said at the beginning, sometimes Jesus can be a little bit of a jerk and jerk that comfortable rug out from underneath us. Because he's trying to teach us something. And this morning, even though the word is not used in the parable itself, I think Jesus is trying to teach us something about competition. As I hear this story again and again and again, I believe that the Pharisee believed that he was competing with everyone else for God's love and favor and connection. And thus he had to mold his life very carefully. Didn't want to step out of line in any way, shape, or form that he might bring God a little discomfort. The model Jewish life. And it was lockstep. That's fine. Tithing is good. Fasting is good. Studying scriptures, wonderful thing. Being in worship and in fellowship and being engaged in doing the next right Jesus thing, good stuff. As long as we don't think that's going to earn us God's love. There's nothing we can do to, quote, earn God's love. And the Pharisee, you know, is there in the temple saying, thank you, God, that I'm such a good guy. Like God wasn't aware of that? You know, I tithe, I fast, I do all these wonderful things, and I'm not like that guy. Scum of the earth, tax collector. God, are you paying attention here? Do you see the competition going on? There was only so much of God's love for that Pharisee, and he needed to get as much as he could. Meanwhile, we have the tax collector standing off at a distance, not even looking up to heaven, just bowed down and saying, God, have mercy on me. Because he knew He was hopeful there was no competition for God's love. Because he knew if there was, he's toast. There's no way. But somehow, even though he suspected that God hated what he was doing and who he was, there was still somewhere in his soul just the tiniest little sliver of hope that there is in God some grace, some mercy, some love. Have mercy on me, God. Have mercy. But we're competitive people, aren't we? Unfortunately. Now, there's some competition that's good, especially when the Beavers and the Ducks win their football game. That's good competition. And it's okay to compete in sports. It's okay to compete in other things, as long as that doesn't become our God. That if I don't win the purple ribbon at the fair, I'm not good enough to be sewing or baking or whatever. I'm probably not good enough for God. You know, it just gets all wound up in there sometimes, unfortunately. So, let's take a minute and look outside of our own selves and look around and try to figure out who God likes. And we need to go back to that very beginning story of creation in Genesis. You know, day 1, it was this, day 2, it was this, day 3, 4, 5. And finally, literally, after creating everything else in the world and in the cosmos, on day 6, not day 7, but day 6.5, God finally says, let's create humans. We'll create them in our own image. So God created humans, male and female, in God's image. God created them. What do we do with that image? I mean, my nose is smaller, larger, more bent, not bent. I have more hair, less hair. I can run faster. I'm smarter. I'm not so smart. I sing better. No, I don't. You know, that's how we think of image. Image, image. See the differences. Even here, differences. That's why I prefer to use the word essence. God created them male and female in God's essence. To get away from the image, it means something dramatically different. It's saying that when God created all of us and all people in all times and places, that right at the center of who we are, is the essence of God. The essence, all of God's love and wisdom and power and glory and truth and passion and forgiveness and all that we speak of God. That's right at the center of who I am, who you are, and you all are. We're all created in the essence of God. It doesn't make any difference how tall I am, how short I am, how anything else I am as an image. There is within me and each person that powerful essence of God that ties us together. So, let's look at Nancy. There's an image, but let's look at the center of her, and what we see is the essence of God. And how about Connie? Look at her. She doesn't look the same as Nancy, but we can look in her, and what do we see? The essence of God. Or look at Craig. And I'm not just picking on the choir people. Those are the 3 names I know. We'll get the rest of you in a minute. But look at Craig. A different image, but at the center of who he is. What do we see? The essence of God. And look at you all. We all look different. The image is different, but at the center of each of us, what do we see? The essence of God. And guess what? It's not just us here gathered in this room at this moment in history. Outside these walls, we could look at anybody in Dallas and we would see the essence of God. That's what's inside. And beyond Dallas, yeah? Okay, I don't know how many of you are British royal watchers, okay? But they've been in the news a lot lately, so it's easy to get an image either of Queen Elizabeth before she died, and you know, when she was in her prime and looking great and regal and doing her thing, or think about King Charles and Camilla right now. You know, if you have an image of them, yeah, they look nice, regal, whatever you want, but right at the center, what do we see? We see essence of God. And hopefully you've seen them, I've seen them, the homeless people among us, sitting at the entrance or exit of the grocery store or the on-ramp or the wherever, and looking miserable, because they are. Can we see right at the center of their being the essence of God? Because it's there. And how about soccer? Okay, it's a growing sport here in America, but boy, South America, they are crazy about soccer. So in your mind's eye, come with me to this huge stadium in Rio where soccer is played. It seats over 100,000 people. Over 100,000 people. We could barely get all of Salem in there. And then there's the players and the coaches and the broadcasters and all these people. See them. And can you see that in each one of them, even though they look different on the outside, and some are rooting for this team and some are rooting for that team, right at the center, each of them has the essence of God. Come with me to an emergency room in Calcutta hospital last night, where a medical team was attempting to save a 14-year-old girl from a heroin overdose. You'll never see her in real life. I won't either, but we can envision that, can't we? And see this 14-year-old and medical staff around her trying everything they can to keep her alive from her heroin overdose. Can we see, not just in the doctors and the medical team around her, but can we see in that 14-year-old girl the essence of God? That's what this parable is trying to help us understand, trying to help the Pharisee in us understand. Because not just this parable, but the whole of the Jesus story reveals this one important truth. God craves a close relationship with every person, every moment of every day. God craves a close relationship because the essence of God is within each of us and all people. We don't have to be perfect. I mean, the Pharisee tried that. And because he was trying so hard to be perfect, he was judgmental and competitive with those he deemed weren't. And that doesn't work. So like the anxious Pharisee, we don't try to be perfect. It's pretty silly to even try. I spent a while trying when I was young. Believe you me, not worth it. Because God doesn't see any real difference between any of us or any people. As God looks across human race today, God sees there's a much loved child of mine that I created in my image. There's another, there's another, there's another, there's another. That's what God sees. Much loved children created in the essence of God. So we need to watch out for that Pharisee that lives within all of us, that is so quick to see the differences between us and somebody else. Always maybe thinking we're a little bit better, or fearing we're a little bit worse than so-and-so. I don't have that much money. Ooh, I've got more than that. You know, it just happens. But David Lose reminds us that anytime we draw a line between who's in and who's out of God's loving embrace, this parable asserts we will find God with a group we just tossed out. Yeah. So compartmentalism, or competition, or judgmentalism, we need to let them go and focus on God's love for us and for all people, and that essence of God that resides literally in all people. For the good news, my friends, is that every person who ever was and is to be was created in God's essence at the core of their being. Jesus invites us with this parable to live our lives in a way that honors that truth. And in doing that, that's how we are, right-sized with God. Thanks be to God.